There comes a moment in every wounded soul's journey when silence is no longer weakness, it is judgment. You gave your heart in truth, your presence in loyalty, and your soul in trust. And they mistook that for something disposable, something they could toy with, walk away from, and never look back. But what they fail to understand is that the soul remembers, and so does life. The universe has a peculiar way of balancing scales, not through vengeance, but through consequence. And now, as the very games they played begin to reflect back on them, they learn this. When you mishandle what is sacred, life doesn't punish, it teaches. And it teaches with precision. The soul is not a toy. There's a quiet dignity in offering someone your soul. It's not just about affection or emotion, it's a sacred gesture. To open your inner world to another is to say, here, this is the most fragile part of me and I trust you to hold it with care. But not everyone understands the weight of such a gift. Some see vulnerability not as an honor, but as an opportunity. And that misunderstanding, whether intentional or careless, is where the damage begins. They didn't just hurt your feelings. They touched something far deeper. They took your loyalty, your gentleness, your depth, and played with it like it was a momentary amusement. But what they didn't understand is that the soul is not a game. It is not made of parts you can break and then walk away from. The soul keeps records, not in anger, but in memory. It holds on to the truth of what happened long after your voice went quiet and your eyes stopped asking why. We live in a culture that often treats emotional depth as weakness. If you're quiet, you're mistaken as naive. If you're kind, you're seen as someone who can be used. But here's the truth. The soul that chooses compassion in a world that profits from cruelty is not weak. It's unshakably strong. You didn't lose when they misused your heart. They did. Because in every game played with sincerity, the one who deceives trades away their own peace for a temporary illusion. There's something deeply sacred about innocence, the kind that isn't ignorance, but conscious purity. You knew who you were. You showed up in truth. And instead of honoring that, they tried to twist it, manipulate it, perhaps even humiliate it. But no one can truly defile a soul that was offered in truth, because eventually truth becomes its own defense. People often believe that if they get away with something, it no longer exists, that if no one calls them out, their actions vanish into thin air. But the soul doesn't work that way. When someone plays with what is sacred, the consequences aren't loud. They're quiet, subtle. They unfold over time, through failed connections, through sleepless nights, through mirrors they can no longer face. You see, when someone damages another person at the level of the soul, they unknowingly damage something in themselves. The part of them that was still capable of true connection becomes dulled. They begin to lose access to their own sincerity because in betraying yours, they've trained themselves to distrust depth altogether. And slowly, life begins to show them what that really costs. This isn't about bitterness. It's about recognition. You're not here to carry what they did to you forever. But you are allowed to name it. You are allowed to say, this was not okay. Because unless you name what happened, you will keep internalizing pain that was never yours to carry. You were not too much. You were not too sensitive. You were simply genuine in a world that often doesn't know what to do with people like you. So let them learn, not through your retaliation, but through their own unraveling. Let life teach what they refuse to learn from love, because in the end, the soul cannot be played with without cost. And while your healing may take time, theirs is just beginning. The difference is you're walking through it with integrity. They're still running from the mirror, and the mirror never forgets. Actions echo in the structure of reality. People often believe that once a moment passes, it disappears. That a choice made in secret, a word spoken in manipulation, or an action taken without accountability dissolves into time, never to be seen again. But this belief overlooks a deep, universal truth. Nothing simply vanishes. Every action has a consequence, and the ripple it creates continues far beyond the moment it was born. There is a structure to reality that responds not to our intentions, but to our integrity. You can say the right words and still set the wrong forces in motion if your heart is not aligned with truth. When someone chooses to deceive, to manipulate, or to exploit another's trust, they might experience an illusion of success. It may look like they've won, but the wind is hollow because what they've really done is set something in motion, something they cannot see yet but will inevitably feel. Life does not seek revenge, it seeks balance. What you put out eventually returns not as punishment, but as reflection. If you throw manipulation into the world, you attract confusion. If you trade sincerity for gain, you begin to lose clarity on who you are. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the person who thought they were gaining control begins to lose peace. It doesn't always happen immediately. Sometimes it takes months, years. But the outcome is certain. You may have been the one who suffered in silence, the one who replayed conversations in your mind, wondering what went wrong. You searched for the moment they changed, tried to make sense of how someone who once seemed genuine could twist your kindness into something they could use. But what you didn't see, what most people don't see, is that while you were dealing with the pain on the surface, reality was quietly preparing its response beneath. There's a depth to life that accounts for everything. No choice made in darkness remains hidden from the light forever. When someone tampers with what is real, your loyalty, your trust, your love, they trigger a response that is built into the very fabric of existence. They think they're moving forward freely, but they are, in fact, walking into the echo of their own behavior. This isn't some mystical curse or dramatic retribution. It's far simpler and far more profound. The energy they put into the world begins to shape their path. If they used your honesty to gain control, they begin to mistrust the honesty of others. If they lied to protect themselves, they find themselves surrounded by people who do the same. What they did to you becomes the language of their world, and they speak it fluently, even when they don't mean to. You don't need to wish harm upon them. Life handles its justice with more precision than you ever could. The best thing you can do is step back and allow the process to unfold. Because while they may still be chasing validation or control, you've begun chasing truth. And that path, while slower and often lonelier at first, leads to strength that cannot be taken and peace that cannot be faked. Your silence is not surrender, it's alignment. You're aligning with a higher order, one that doesn't operate on revenge, but on restoration. Eventually, those who traded your soul for their comfort will have to sit with the consequences of what they chose, not because you forced it, but because life requires it. And when that day comes, it will not be your voice that speaks loudest. It will be the echo of their own actions returning home. The weight of misused trust becomes a lifelong burden. Trust is not given casually. It is built, earned, and offered from a place of hope. When you trust someone, you are saying, I believe you will not harm the parts of me I cannot protect with logic. It is an emotional investment made not out of weakness, but out of strength. You believed in the goodness of someone's intentions. You allowed them into spaces of your life that not everyone gets to see. That act alone was sacred. But when that trust is misused, something shifts. Something subtle yet deeply painful. It's not just about the betrayal itself, it's about what that betrayal changes in you. You begin to doubt your own perception. You ask yourself questions like, was I blind? Did I imagine everything? And slowly you realize that the damage goes beyond what they did. It reaches into your ability to trust yourself. For the one who misuse your trust, the consequences are often invisible at first. On the surface, they may move on easily. They may act unaffected. They may even convince themselves that what happened was no big deal. But deep down, they carry something they cannot escape. The burden of having taken something pure and turned it into pain. That burden doesn't always show up in dramatic ways. Often it appears in the quiet moments, when they can't connect with others, when they avoid looking too deeply into their own behavior, when relationships start to feel hollow without explanation. Because the truth is, when you misuse someone's trust, you damage the foundation upon which real connection is built. You teach yourself, consciously or not, that trust is negotiable, that it can be used as a tool to gain something in the short term. And that belief, once accepted, becomes a weight. It disconnects you from authenticity. It makes it harder to receive what you once so easily manipulated. Eventually, life stops offering you the depth you took for granted, because you no longer meet it with the same sincerity. You, on the other hand, are forced to rebuild. You have to pick up the pieces of your trust and learn how to protect what's sacred without becoming cold. That's no small task. It takes strength to remain open after being hurt. It takes discernment to know who is worthy of your trust again, and perhaps most difficult of all, it takes courage to admit that what happened changed you, but it didn't destroy you. As for the one who betrayed you, they will come to understand in their own time that trust is not just about what they did to you, it's about what they did to themselves. Because to betray someone's trust is also to betray the part of yourself that was still capable of honesty. You may move forward with integrity. They move forward with the memory of what they did and the silence of what it cost them. This is not about hoping for their regret. It's about recognizing the law of emotional consequence. Misused trust becomes a shadow they carry, whether they admit it or not. It shows up in the disconnect they feel, in the discomfort they can't quite name. It becomes part of their emotional environment. And one day, when they finally meet someone they wish to build something real with, they may struggle. Not because they're being punished, but because the very skill they once used to manipulate has become the reason they can no longer receive what they once had. Your healing is your responsibility, but their burden is theirs to carry. Suffering becomes the teacher when compassion is ignored. There's a moment in every human life when we're offered the chance to be compassionate, when someone stands before us in pain, trusting us with their vulnerability. In that moment, we're not being asked to fix them or to carry their burden, but simply to acknowledge their humanity, to see them, to respond with care instead of calculation. But when that moment is ignored, when someone chooses indifference over empathy, life often steps in to do the teaching they refuse to accept. Compassion is not weakness. It is not something that exists at the surface of life. It reaches into the depths of who we are and reflects the quality of our character. When someone chooses to turn away from your pain, not because they are overwhelmed, but because they see no value in your suffering, They are not escaping responsibility. They are postponing their own lesson, because what is ignored in love is often revisited through experience. You may have cried quietly, waiting for them to notice. You may have tried to explain, to open up, to show the cracks forming beneath your calm words. And they may have dismissed it. They may have seen your struggle as weakness or even as an inconvenience. But what they didn't realize is that the universe doesn't allow us to overlook the suffering of others without eventually being asked to understand it from within. Life teaches us in the language we best understand. And for those who lack compassion, life often teaches through discomfort, not as punishment, but as awakening. At some point, they will face a version of what you felt. It may not look identical, but it will carry the same emotional truth: abandonment, betrayal, isolation, or confusion. And in that moment, they'll begin to see what they once ignored. They'll remember the voice they didn't listen to, the eyes that pleaded for understanding, the silence they brushed aside as dramatic. It won't come with rage. It will come with realization, a quiet recognition that they missed something sacred. And that recognition, while subtle, has the power to reshape them. Suffering in its purest form is not just pain, it's a mirror. It reflects back what we've given and what we've denied. Those who offered compassion in their hardest moments tend to grow in grace. Those who avoided it often find themselves revisited by lessons they thought they'd escaped, not because life is cruel, but because life insists on depth. It won't let us skate through relationships without learning how to honor another's humanity. You may never witness their awakening. You may never hear the apology or receive the closure, but that doesn't mean it isn't happening. Growth often happens in silence. And while they may never admit it aloud, the memory of your pain and their choice to look away stays with them. It shapes how they see others. It influences the weight they feel in moments that used to be light. The truth is, compassion costs nothing in the moment, but its absence leaves a debt. And that debt doesn't vanish. It lives in the parts of life where connection should be and isn't. It appears in relationships that feel shallow, in conversations that lack warmth, in moments where they long for comfort and can't find it. That's the echo of compassion withheld. You, on the other hand, are not defined by what they failed to give. Your depth, your empathy, your willingness to care, those are strengths. And while they may have overlooked them, life hasn't. You are being shaped by your healing, not broken by your history. And as life teaches them what they once refused to learn, you're already becoming what they could not be, someone who feels deeply and lives fully. Redemption begins with the recognition of what was done. Redemption is not found in apologies spoken too late or gestures made to erase the past. It begins with something far more difficult: recognition. A clear, unflinching acknowledgement of the impact one's actions had on another human being. Without that, everything else is a performance. And for those who once played with someone's soul, the road back to any form of peace begins at that exact point, when they finally stop justifying, minimizing, or forgetting what they did and start seeing it with honest eyes. For a long time, they may convince themselves that it wasn't as serious as it felt to you. They might rewrite the story in their mind, turn it into something mutual, something less damaging, something easier to live with. That's often the first defense against guilt, reshaping the truth until it fits into a more comfortable narrative. But the real story never disappears. It lingers in the background, waiting for the moment when silence becomes too loud to ignore. It may come to them in quiet hours, when there's no one left to impress and no distractions to lean on. It may arrive in the form of a relationship they can't quite connect with, or in the uncomfortable feeling that something inside them is unsettled. And eventually, they'll trace it back not to what happened to them, but to what they did to someone else. That's when the first crack in denial appears. That's when redemption becomes possible. To recognize what was done is not to collapse in shame. It's to accept responsibility without distortion. It means understanding that behind every moment of betrayal or indifference was a person who trusted, who felt, who tried. And it means facing the reality that their choices left a mark, one that didn't disappear when they walked away. For some, that recognition is delayed by pride. Admitting fault feels like weakness. But true growth never comes from pride. It comes from humility. The kind of humility that says, I may not be able to undo the damage, but I will no longer pretend it didn't happen. That shift in perspective is what turns regret into transformation. It doesn't erase the past, but it reshapes the future. You, who endured the silence and the confusion, may never see this moment with your own eyes. You may never hear the words you once waited for. But that doesn't mean it won't happen. Growth often happens in private. And those who once dismissed your pain may be living with the quiet knowledge that they contributed to it. Not out of cruelty, perhaps, but out of carelessness. And now that carelessness has become a mean. There is no timeline for when someone finally sees the truth. It can take months, years, even longer. But when it happens, it leaves a permanent imprint. The image of your face, your voice, your trust. All of it returns, not as a memory to escape, but as a lesson that cannot be bypassed. And what they do with that recognition determines everything. Some will run from it. Others will grow from it. But none will forget it. Because when you play with something sacred, it leaves an echo. And that echo becomes the foundation upon which redemption either begins or breaks. For you, healing was never about watching them feel the same pain. It was about releasing yourself from carrying what was never yours. And for them, healing can only start when they finally stop running from what they caused. Recognition is not weakness. It is the first step toward restoration. But it only begins when the truth is finally allowed to speak.